Benjamin Netanyahu remains defiant. The Israeli Prime Minister is facing corruption charges, but says it's a witch hunt ahead of the election. Can he avoid prosecution? And what does it mean for his political career? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Laura Kyle. This is Inside Story. Welcome to the programme. He's the first sitting Israeli Prime Minister to be put on an official notice of planned prosecution on charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. But Benjamin Netanyahu says he's innocent and will stay in his post. Israel's Attorney General says he plans to indict Netanyahu on corruption charges. If convicted, he could face up to 10 years in prison. Netanyahu dismisses the allegations as a political witch hunt designed to oust him from power. And a hearing to decide if the prosecution goes ahead won't take place until after Israel's general election in April. So what's likely to happen if, by then, Netanyahu has won a fifth term as Prime Minister? We'll be speaking to our guests in just a moment, but first let's take a closer look at the possible charges. The Attorney General is recommending Netanyahu be charged with using his influence to help a friend at the country's largest internet provider in exchange for positive coverage on its website, and also of colluding with Israel's top-selling newspaper for favourable coverage. Netanyahu is also suspected of receiving more than $250,000 worth of lavish gifts from business tycoons. In a TV address on Thursday, Netanyahu said the case would, quote, collapse like a house of cards.
For 3 years, they have been carrying out a political pursuit against us, an unprecedented hunting expedition with one goal: to topple the right-wing government led by me and to bring to power the leftist party of Lapid and Gantz. They have put inhumane pressure on the state attorney general. I tell you, the citizens of Israel, this house of cards will collapse. I'm absolutely certain of that. I'm certain of it 4,000%. I plan on serving you and the state as Prime Minister for many years.
Well, let's take a look at other high-ranking Israeli officials who've been indicted in the past. In 2011, Israel's former president, Moshe Katsav, was convicted of rape and sentenced to 7 years in prison. In 2015, former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert was jailed for 6 years for bribery, though that was later reduced to 18 months. And Arya Deri was convicted of taking bribes while serving as Interior Minister and given a 3-year jail sentence in the year 2000. Well, let's bring in our guests now. And joining us from Tel Aviv is Akiva Eldar, Israeli columnist for Our Monitor and co-author of the biography of former Israeli President Shimon Peres. From Zagreb, Yossi Mekel-berg, professor in international relations at Regent's University in London and associate fellow in the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. And from West Jerusalem, Mitchell Barak, CEO of Kivun Global Research and a speechwriter for former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and former Israeli President Shimon Peres. A very warm welcome to all of you. Mitchell, how much damage is this intent to indict by the Attorney General likely to cause Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, it really depends who you ask, because for the faithful of Netanyahu, this is going to embolden a lot of them to get out to the polls. The Prime Minister, this was not so much of a surprise. I mean, I think he would have liked to get off on 1 or 2 of those cases, but it's not so much. He's prepared everyone that this is going to happen. And what he's successfully done over the last few weeks is he's actually made this into a political issue, not a legal one. That the elections, they're trying to steal the elections even before the elections take place. They're trying to influence, and what, the left, they call the left, it can't do in the ballot box, they're trying to do with the legal, with legally bringing him down. And a lot of people believe that. So the people that, support Netanyahu, a lot of them are sticking with him and say it's a conspiracy, because a lot of those people are still convinced that the left of center labor type of leadership is running the country, even though Likud has been really running, in the government for the last 40 years. And I think what happens is up until now, for a lot of people, we knew that the emperor or the prime minister didn't have any clothes. And now when you see it, that he doesn't have any clothes, he actually borrowed clothes from someone else, it looks really bad for everyone else.
Do you think, Akiva, that Netanyahu genuinely believes that he's done anything wrong here?
It's a great question. Netanyahu, according to experts, psychologists who analyzed his personality, is a clinical narcissist. It's all about him. And I think that he convinced himself that he is the ultimate victim here, and it's the left after him. But I think that this can turn out to be a double-edged sword, because if it's about politics, there are people, even Likud voters, the average Likud voter my age, okay, who remembers Menachem Begin and is comparing Menachem Begin, who has built this party and was the first prime minister from the Likud. His claim to fame was that it was democracy über alles. It's democracy first and the rule of law. We remember his phrase. He said, there are judges in Jerusalem, and he respected the law. And people who remember him will compare Netanyahu to him and say, okay, if it's politics, we don't like this kind of politics.
Do you think, Yossi, that the timing of the Attorney General's announcement has been fair? I mean, it does come before these elections, and to be fair to Netanyahu, you do get a presumption of innocence, don't you, until otherwise found guilty?
Well, the presumption of innocence is there, but, you know, there is no wrong time to have justice. And it's not that the Attorney General decided to declare an early election. It was Netanyahu himself that brought it on himself by declaring early elections. But I think the choice now for the Israeli voters, it's either Netanyahu or democracy. There is no third option, because what we see in front of us, as the previous speakers are saying, this is someone that lacks any integrity. It's not only about the legal side of it. This is for court, and everyone is entitled to the presumption of innocence. But it's about standards of behavior in government. It's about, I think when we listen to his speech, to Netanyahu's speech from yesterday, it's almost worse than actually what he is accused of, because he tried to strip Israeli democracy of any substance by a vicious attack on democracy, on the media, on political opponents. So actually it exposes him in front of the voters for who he really is.
But how much do the voters actually care about that, Mitchell?
Well, I mean, a lot of them do. And like I said in the beginning, the ones that do weren't going to vote for him anyway. And the ones that don't, what a lot of voters focus on, and every election has really been run on this, is security and foreign policy. Mostly security, either security or peace, whatever side of the coin that is. But for the right of center voters, it's all about security. It's about the land of Israel. It's about the Jewish character of the state of Israel. So they're willing to overlook some of this. I mean, Israel is a Middle East democracy. It's a democracy in the Middle East where everyone votes. So a lot of them have the attitude, what's a little bakshish between some friends in a Middle East democracy? And they're willing to overlook that.
Absolutely, because Netanyahu's message is that Israel needs him, that he is Mr. Security.
Correct. Correct. Not only do they need him, but no one else can do the job. And he's successfully convinced many Israelis for a long period of time that he is the best guy for the job. And, you know, I will give him credit on this. There's not a lot of world leaders today that are very close with Trump, and there are not a lot of world leaders that are very close and have a good relationship with Putin. And he's probably the only one that has both of those things. So that is appealing, and that is attractive to Israeli voters who have a geopolitical sense of what's going on, and security is very much on their mind in the region, in Israel itself, and in the region.
You mentioned Trump, and it's hard, isn't it, Akiva, not to draw parallels to Donald Trump, who is also coming under fire in D.C., but has a very strong support base that listens to Trump's message, which is similar to Netanyahu's, that he's the victim of some liberal conspiracy to get rid of him.
Yeah, actually, they're even using the same language, the same phrases. Like Netanyahu said yesterday, about fake. It wasn't file 1,000. It was fake 1,000, fake 2,000. This is, the numbers that follow the investigation. But following your previous question, Laura, it's very important to say that it's not only the voters, because Netanyahu will have to form a coalition. And what happened yesterday, not only the allegations, not only the statement and the indictment, but his behavior, his conduct after that made Mr. Gantz, the blue and white party, that was a potential partner for a legitimate coalition, that a balanced coalition that could deal with the peace process and the other challenges, it forced Gantz to say, Netanyahu is not going to be my partner. Netanyahu is illegitimate. And this is now, the Israeli voters know now that it will be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for Netanyahu to form a coalition. He will have to maybe to form a coalition with the Kahanists, with, those ultra, extra large radical right.
Let's just look at the centrist candidates, as you mentioned there, Akiva, Benny Gantz and also Yair Lapid. They've posed some sort of significant challenge, haven't they, Yossi, to Netanyahu in these upcoming elections? How threatened should he be by that?
And I think those are crucial elections for Israel to make a real decision which direction the country is taking. Is it taking the Netanyahu direction, which is morally corrupt, it's tainted by this kind of allegation, and also veers sharply to the right and includes in government extreme racists, people that believe in the transfer of Israeli Palestinians and Palestinians from the West Bank to other countries, or a more considerate, I won't call it left as Netanyahu, it's at best a centrist party like the one led by Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, that's under certain circumstances is ready to make the compromise needed for peace with the Palestinians. It has more leaning towards social justice and need to be tested in government. I think this is the choice. I agree with the previous speaker. The Israeli voters are quite conservative in attitude, and they take the attitude that they rather have Netanyahu than they know that any untested commodity. But I think this is the time probably to reconsider. I think the idea that Netanyahu is replaceable, I think the graveyard of history is full of leaders that believe that irreplaceable, and history proved them wrong.
OK, so Mitchell, who might be waiting in the wings to replace Netanyahu?
Well, it's hard to say at this point. I mean, Gantz and Lapid, the tag team or the duo, the dynamic duo of Gantz and Lapid, is certainly making a play for it. But, they are lacking experience in the area, meaning, Gantz has never really sat in a security cabinet other than when he was chief of staff. He never voted on these things. He doesn't have experience in government. Lapid has minimal experience in government. So, again, you can be elected president of the United States, and I'm not just talking about this one, but the previous one and ones before that don't have military experience and get it and are able to do a good job. For Israelis, you also have the Likud, meaning what may happen after the election is... Correct, there is Ya'alon. Well, that's the interesting thing also about that party. They're calling it a center party, but it's really like a center-left party dressed up as in wolf's clothing, meaning they've taken some Netanyahu's ex-lovers, if you will, meaning his former defense minister, his former communications czar, and his former cabinet secretary, and say, we are protecting the right, which is really a good way to go to the voter, because you want to be seen as left, but have the dressings of someone that's right and is going to protect security. But I think that the real question is not going to be, believe it or not, it's who people vote for in the election, but what happens after April 10th. Because as Akiva said, if Netanyahu, there's a moral problem right now. Everyone has come behind him and said they're not going to sit with Gantz and Lapid, and they stand behind him, okay? After April 10th, it could be that he is not able to form a coalition. And whereas Gantz and Lapid are trying to break away those right-wing voters now, they'll break a few away. What they need to do is break one of the parties away afterwards, and they'll go for either Kahlon's party or one of the ultra-Orthodox parties. and then they may be able to form something, or the Likud throws out Netanyahu and says, listen, not throws him out, but says, we're not going to go sink on this ship with you. We need to put someone else in and either join the government or have elections within our party.
That was going to be my next question. The Likud party, I mean, they've been rattled enough so far, haven't they, to try to block the Attorney General from announcing his decision. How much longer are they going to be willing to stick behind Netanyahu? Akiva?
Well, actually, we're looking for the toddler that will be willing to say, or will have the courage to say that the king is naked, that King Netanyahu is naked, that he is tainted with bribery. And, the Attorney General is anything but left. He was appointed by Netanyahu, as well as the former chief of police was appointed. And they are a bunch of, I could say, points who are playing according to the directions that are coming from the king and from the queen. And there is, but what you need perhaps it can be Gideon Sa'ar, that will step forward and will say, well, Netanyahu is becoming, he was an asset for many years, and now Netanyahu is a liability for the Likud, and we have others, and they may go for primaries. And the other thing is that, the president has to appoint the next member of Knesset who will meet the challenge of forming a government. And perhaps the president will say that, his hand is shaking before he will shake Netanyahu's hand and will say, this man needs to form an Israeli government. I am not going to be part of this.
Yossi, should Netanyahu step down now?
Well, I think if he has any source of integrity, any left in him, if there is any, yes, he should step down because these are serious allegations. He just needs to follow the advice he gave previous Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert when he was in similar situation, that he called him, you can't stay in power, you can't run such a complex country while there are serious allegations of corruption against you. So he just should follow his own advice. And I agree with Akiva, Netanyahu becomes a liability. The quicker the Likud party would realize that he is a liability for them, and they start looking for the day after Netanyahu and understand, yes, he delivered the goods for them for more than a decade now. It's time for him to go, and also for the country to move on, because as long it looks like outside the country is a complete farce if Netanyahu keeps his position.
Yeah, Mitchell, because surely people will be looking at him saying, well, even if you win... Oh, yes, go ahead, Akiva.
I just wanted to jump in and say that right now, anything that he will do, if, for instance, he will open another attack on Gaza, nobody will believe, nobody, of course, his followers, but decent people will ask themselves, is he doing it because this is what is the interest of Israel right now? Or it's his interest to distract the attention of the public opinion from his own problems?
Yes, we come back to that central question, don't we? How strong is his following? Can he retain the numbers to get back into power in April?
So he has the full support of his party right now. The thing is because it's a parliamentary system, he only really needs about 25% of the vote. And it's the other parties that are going to fall in line, meaning it's the right of center parties and it's the religious parties. It's the bloc. And that's what this whole thing is, and that's all the messaging that's going on right now. Every time he mentions the name Gantz, Lapid, it's left, and then he'll tack on the Arabs. They're going to use the Arabs, which is really sort of a racist comment because there's a 1.2 million Arab citizens in Israel, and if you're saying they can't be part of the government, that's really not the right thing to say in a democracy. And he's been saying that, so he's scaring the people that might consider going to Gantz and Lapid by saying, the only way they're getting in is with those Israeli Arabs. And we know those Israeli Arabs, they don't have our best of interests at heart. So again, there's a reason he passed the nation-state law a few months ago. It's successful, very successful among most Israelis, but specifically among the Likud voters and everyone on the right. And he's going to play on those themes up to the election, and all he wants is the block right now.
So, Yossi, the extent that people are then going to buy into that and overlook the fact that this case is going to be hanging over him if he wins this election. It's going to be hanging over the best part of this year. We don't know when the indictment, if it actually happens, will take place. But it's going to be there. It's going to be a distraction for him. And he's got an awful lot of other issues to deal with.
No doubt we'll see in the next 40 days Netanyahu at his worst, inciting against minority, inciting against the media, what he calls the left. But I think this is the time for the centrist and the center-left to unite and to send a very clear message that they won't tolerate it. It's also for the legal system that won't tolerate incitement against minorities, against political opponents. And maybe it's time, when this debate is going on, to say, yes, the representative of the Arab minorities in Israel are legitimate partners in a future government. They are not aliens. They are not against the country. They are part of the country. They are equal citizens. And maybe there is a chance here. Not that I believe much that is going to happen, but maybe there is a chance here to start changing the discourse of incitement into something more constructive. I think that's what the country needs at the moment.
You know, some may view this in the context of the Palestinian issue, people who sort of take a step back. And Akiva, they would perhaps be asking a legitimate question, which is why would a prime minister be indicted for accepting bribes and drinking lots of pink champagne, but not, on the other hand, killing hundreds of Palestinian protesters?
It's a brilliant question, Laura. First of all, I would like to say that hopefully, you know, what's happening now with the incitement will be a real wake-up call for the Jewish minority. As you know, unprecedented was the statement coming from AIPAC. And I'm very curious to see how many standing ovations he is going to get there when he will be one of the keynote speakers 2 weeks before the elections in the Apex convention in April. But I'm afraid that the great damage that Netanyahu is doing is removing the most crucial issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the occupation, these settlements, the breach of international law, and this has been removed from the discourse, and we are going to pay for it. And well, I hope that perhaps President Trump will save us and will put forward his blueprint, and the Israeli public will have to make up his mind. As Trump said a few months ago, if you don't go for, if there is no progress in a two-state solution, you are going to get Abu Mazen as your prime minister. So perhaps, you know, he will save us from ourselves.
Indeed. I mean, that's the thought, isn't it? Mitchell, Trump's deal, so-called deal of the century, forcing this issue back on the table. To what extent do you think this is all a distraction for Israel?
The deal, I mean, you know, they're going to use it. Netanyahu will again use it because he successfully campaigned the last time as being the one who said, I can counter Obama, because they're going to put pressure on Israel now. So he's going to say the same thing. What I would like to go back to is something that Yossi said is, you know, we did polls among Israeli Arab citizens for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation a year and a half ago. And we asked them specifically, what conditions would you go into the government? We presented the results at Tel Aviv University with member of Knesset Ayman Odeh there, and he was very encouraged because a third of Israeli Arabs said, under the right conditions, Israeli Arab parties should go in the government, and another 10% said, you know, we don't want to go in, but we could support it from the outside. So that's a considerable amount of people that are ready to participate. So I think that, you know, if we're talking about a Middle East democracy, democracy means everyone, not only everyone is equal, everyone can and should partake and has a responsibility to partake, and that includes being in government. And if you're going to disenfranchise people before, that's a problem. It's
been a really interesting discussion. We do have to finish it there. It's going to be certainly a very interesting election to keep an eye on as well. Thank you very much to all of our guests today, Akiva Eldar, Yossi Mekel-berg and Mekel-berg. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.